Halftime show, Terry Ford, Tyler Head. On a Monday where these are the kind of days where you have an idea where you're going and what you're doing and what you're going to talk about, Tyler, and then all of a sudden things take a gigantic shift in another direction, not a surprising direction, but in another direction.
Well, I don't think there's a better way to exemplify how big of a deal this is than the fact that Terry actually showed up for the start of the show.
That's right, man.
I didn't have to just riff for 3 or 4 minutes waiting for you to come in the studio, Lo. So, yes, big news, not unexpected news, but big news nonetheless that, we're going to be looking for a new baseball coach.
Yeah, and look, it felt like watching some of the presser that Elijah popped up on our social media, on Twitter, X Twitter, with Coach Kingston, watching the post game. Sometimes you get the vibe that they know.
It's a dead man walking.
Yeah, I mean, you know that they know. And look, a couple years ago, when they missed the postseason, there was a lot of rumblings where there's going to be a change, but there were so many injuries.
Mm-hmm. That was his mulligan. Yeah,
the Coach Tanner went, look, there's a lot of injuries, and you bounce back and go to the Supers, and you're playing Florida for a right to go to Omaha. And obviously, if you go to Omaha, we're not having this conversation today.
Of course not.
I'll say this. First of all, I mean, look, Mark Kingston was a good guy. I like Mark. Mark was a really good man.
From a personal standpoint, no problems with him at all.
Now, all my interactions with Mark were great. Mark was very generous with his time, here on the show with Jay and I, and then with Jay in the afternoon with Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
Mark was great in a lot of ways. But, look, and he's a good baseball coach. This idea, he's a bum, he's an idiot, he's a moron.
You don't get to the SEC without being a good coach.
He's not those things. What he's not, I mean, like I said, what Mark Kingston did here, and we've talked about this, you put him in a lot of programs in America, and Mark Kingston would be just fine with what he's doing here.
Oh, I mean, he'd be there for 12, 15 years at some places.
Well, look what Chad's sitting there doing at College of Charleston.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, come on. I mean, you sit in different places have different expectations, and if you meet those expectations or exceed them, doesn't mean go to Omaha. Doesn't mean you got to go to Supers every year. Doesn't mean this or that. But when you're the head coach at South Carolina, it comes with a different level of expectation.
Yeah.
And if you can't get there, then eventually someone else is going to come here to try to reach that level of expectation. And that's really what happened to Mark Kingston is, you've been here 7 years, you've been to 2 Supers, but you've missed the postseason twice. And you had the goofy COVID year and everything else. But you just didn't get where this program needs to be, Tyler. And at the end of the day, that's what cost you the job.
And I think it's important to also note that, of course, Ray Tanner is the AD, the former baseball coach here that did lead South Carolina to those national championships that you mentioned, 2 seasons ago where they missed the postseason, but you were able to look at the scope of injuries and say, okay, if these things didn't happen, they probably would have at least made a regional. Who knows what happens after that? And Ray Tanner, with that deep understanding of baseball, more than any of us know, because he's a former head coach, understood that and made the decision that, hey, I'm going to give him another year, get another couple of years because I understand this deeper than anybody else would. So the fact that Ray Tanner and the Board of Trustees, all the people involved who made the decision to move on from him, says that, okay, from that deeper understanding perspective, they did not see this program getting any better going forward.
Well, you go to a Super last year, and then the thought is, okay, here we go. And to me, you have to at least get back to a Super this year.
Right.
And when you go out meekly in the region, I mean, heck, but this is the typical 2024 South Carolina Gamecock baseball team. You had a chance to win all 3 of those, but you also could have lost all 3 of those.
Exactly.
Typical South Carolina in 2024 with the baseball squad. So you go out and you look very lethargic in a 2-0 loss to a team. By the way, you couldn't score any runs on a team that had a squad ERA of over 6.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that John Smoltz was pitching for James Madison yesterday.
I mean, you're sitting there just shaking your head. I mean, so it didn't end well. The regional, you came back. You could have lost 2 because you had to come back and win game 1.
That's kind of the funny thing that we obviously enjoyed the moment, Messina hitting the tying home run, Tippett in the walk-off. But, hindsight being 2020, you were 1 strike away from losing that game 7-5.
Right, and then you go play NC State. Look, you're 4-4 against NC State late, and NC State gets the 2 go-ahead runs on a bases-loaded walk and a throwing error.
Right.
You're 4-4 late, and it wasn't like, you gave up the runs legit. You hit a batter, bases loaded walk, and then you a throwing error, and all of a sudden you lose 6-4. Every one of these games you could have lost. Every one of these games you could have won. And that was kind of this team. And for the most part this year, it felt like inconsistency was basically the only consistent, was you're going to be inconsistent.
That was mine. This is before the Kingston news came out earlier this morning. I said the one word that sticks out to me about this team this season was incomplete, because you had certain times where, man, the bat offense looks great. Certain times, hey, the pitching looks pretty good. Mm-hmm. Certain times, man, the defense is really, really buttoned up, really looking really good. But it was never consistent where all three were working in sync at one time. You'd have a game or two here. Mm-hmm. We're saying, man, those 3 games in a row, the sweep against Vanderbilt, everything looked good that weekend. You know, when you run-rolled Kentucky, man, everything looked good that day. But then when you needed to win to the next game or the next series, one of those elements was not going to be in place, and that was kind of what ended up plaguing them over the course of the weekend at in Raleigh, where the offense just didn't show up yesterday. You know, you had defensive issues on Friday once again, still able to win the game, obviously, but it was just, kind of a microcosm for what the season was.
And, at the end of the day, the lack of production with runners on base and runners in scoring position came back to bite you yesterday. The whole weekend, you're 0 for 20.
1,000%. They were 5 of 40 with runners on.
Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
First of all, the good news is you had 40 runners on base. Bad news is you only went 5 of 40.
Can't do that.
I mean, you're not going to win like that, especially when you're now in the NCAAs. Again, it's a solid program. It's not a bad program, but a solid program is not good enough at South Carolina.
No, it's not.
It's not.
And again, Wes and I were talking about the apathy. And he was like, I was at the Georgia series, and it just did not seem like the atmosphere that should have been for welcoming in one of the best teams in the country when you yourself were projected at that point in time to be a national seed. Like, you were in line to host a regional at that point in time, and, man, we should have been packed to the gills. It should have felt like a postseason atmosphere, and it didn't. And is that the reason why you lost the series? It wasn't, but that just kind of shows you where the fan base's minds were with this team at that time.
And you think about it, too. Remember, going into the Georgia series, the conversation was, well, man, if you take 2 out of 3 from Georgia, could you be a top 8 seed?
Yeah. Well,
could you?
Take 2 out of 3 against Georgia, find a way to win 1 game in Knoxville. You split those final 2 series 3-3. You got a good shot at maybe being in the top 8.
Yeah, you absolutely host, and you're right. You might be able to sneak in the top 8. Instead, you lost all 6. And, yeah, you pop back at Hoover. But even Hoover, this is the weird thing about this team. Even at Hoover, when you go 3-2, you walk away going, you feel the baseball you play for the championship. So you still got a bad taste in your mouth.
Exactly.
And it's just been like that this year. And when you come off of going to a super and the expectation level, people are buying back in again, right?
Right.
Because, look, I was here 2 years ago. First baseball season when they missed the playoffs.
Yep.
When they missed the NCAAs. And the fan base was not in a very good mood. And there were folks that wanted this to happen after that year. But because of the injuries, you come back and you go to a super. Look, I'll say this, and that team last year was an Omaha team.
Oh, undoubtedly.
You watch that team play, but when they played LSU and they were healthy, South Carolina stood toe-to-toe with the national champion.
Were they 3 in the country at that point in time?
Yeah.
They were somewhere up there.
I mean, that was a heavyweight fight, and South Carolina split those 2 games with LSU.
Yep.
Petrie takes Skeen's yard.
Which nobody had done.
Right. I mean, South Carolina was an Omaha team last year. But again, injuries derailed it. And it always feels like this is what happens in these situations, Tyler. It comes down to this, and we've always heard this, whether it could be like my dad when I was making 5 million excuses. Boy, it's always something with you, isn't it? How about a little less something and a little more doing?
Right.
And it always seemed like it was something. Like injuries a couple years ago. Injuries last year, when you looked like you really had a team that could go and play in the College World Series. There's always, okay, this happened, that happened, this happened. And after a while, the somethings, you just got to go, look, no one's arguing your somethings, but you got a lot of somethings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to have to, part company.
It's, let's put this into a context that a lot of people understand. Like, if you're just at your normal office job, and you have that one person that's constantly sick, constantly calling out, constantly coming up with the excuses of why they can't be at work, why they can't do their job, eventually you're going to move on from them. If you have the person that, I don't know, they have a sick day once every couple months and say, felt bad that day, use an excuse then, that's fine because it's not a consistent thing. But when you're just piling on excuse after excuse and having to justify why a team is not performing up to it's standards, you eventually get sick of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the idea that, once again, this is a program that when Ray Tanner, before he stepped down, the last 3 coaches had been to Omaha.
Yes.
Since then, you haven't gotten to Omaha since Ray Tanner stepped down. And this is a program, and no one's sitting here saying you got to be in Omaha every year or anything like that. But this needs to be a program that competes to go to Omaha and goes to Omaha.
And look, I don't envy the position Chad Holbrook got put in by being the guy after the guy.
No way. I'm with you.
Like we talk about with the Saban thing and Kalen DeBoer. Like, you don't want to be that guy because you're immediately going to be judged compared to everything that Ray Tanner did. And obviously, Chad Holbrook didn't last very long. So Kingston comes in as Tanner's first hire as the AD as well, and has to end up performing to not those same standards, but be that guy that gets you at least back in that realm of saying, hey, we're close to what we once were, and he just never was able to do that.
No, and again, it's a solid program. It's an above average program. It's not a cellar dweller. It's not the Vandy. It's not Vandy football of the SEC and baseball. It's a program that, again, the last 2 years you made the NCAAs. It's not a program that is on life support, needs you to napalm it and start over. It's just you need someone who's going to get it from where it's at back to where it used to be.
Right.
And that's what you're looking for. And again, you and I have had this conversation about the whole, hey, just because you were there before, don't expect to get back there again. Well, why can't I expect that if we've been there before? Of course I can expect that.
Because it can happen.
Yeah.
This program and the resource that you have here can be enough to get you there.
Yeah, that's always my point on this. Well, don't expect it. Like you and I talked about Nebraska football last week.
Mm-hmm.
Is the world different? Sure. Would it be more difficult to bring those skill position guys from California and Florida to Lincoln, Nebraska to play football and freeze their can off?
Sure.
Sure. But you know what? If I'm a Nebraska fan, I expect it.
Yeah.
You know why? Because for about 30 years we did it.
Exactly. You have a track record of doing it. Now, if Vandy football is expecting Clark Lee to put them in the college football playoff, it's like, all right, well, you've never been there before. That's a little bit of a lofty expectation, but this is different. Again, we're only a decade or so removed from Carolina being at that mountaintop, being the most feared program in college baseball. I reference back to Tony Vitello a couple weeks ago when they went to play Tennessee, and they asked him about the upcoming weekend series. I don't think he even mentioned South Carolina. Like, it's like, we're the fans are going to be there, school's out. Like, he talked about everything but the game.
Remember this one? Well, when you're on the field, you want to win.
Yeah, he was looking at, motivating factors, and Carolina being one of them was not on that list.
No, and I just think that losing those 6 games and coupled with this puts the end of Mark's coaching tenure, because those 6 games you didn't even look like you belonged.
No, I mean, and look, Georgia's pitching staff wasn't stellar, so you did score some runs there and kept pace with them to a degree, but yeah, you didn't look like you were in the same league as those 2 teams. And look, rightfully so, both those teams are now playing in super regionals. They're 2 of the best teams in the entire country.
But that's where you want to be.
But that's where you want to be.
Right. You should be in the conversation with those teams, not losing 6 straight to them.
Right.
And I think that's really where everything turned this year. Because you're going into that Georgia series, like we said, man, you win 2 out of 3, maybe pull a game against Tennessee, maybe you're a top 8 seed, and everything crumbled.
Right.
And I remember last year, that Omaha team with the injuries and the problems, the finish did not go well, but then you did get to a super and lose to Florida. All right, the candidates. Let's take a look at the early list. David Cloninger has been cooking on this from the Post and Courier. Let's see what David's list of candidates looks like as we get back in here on the halftime show with Terry Ford and Tyler Head on the game.